Hello everyone. On behalf of OLG, I'd like to welcome you all to the 2022 Festivals and Events Ontario Energize Conference. My name is Mikhail Bakonjic, Community Programs Manager at OLG. OLG has been a proud sponsor of FEO's conference for the past 10 years and are excited to be a part of today's event, celebrating the accomplishments of the festival and events industry in Ontario. Despite the challenges faced in the past 2 years, Ontario's festival and events industry organizers continue to persevere and make things happen in their communities one way or another, bringing people together in both traditional and untraditional ways. Congratulations to FEO for hosting another great conference for us all to enjoy. We appreciate all the time and effort that went into making this possible. Lastly, I want to thank you all again for being here to participate in this conference, learning, celebrating, and progressing the festivals and events industry in Ontario and making Ontario a better place to live.
Well, thank you very much to all of our friends from OLG. We couldn't have done this without you. We really appreciate your support year over year. A little bit of a jump around this morning. Welcome back, everybody, from our MEP session. And one of the big topics for everybody as we come out of this and as we were into it is everybody's mental health. And that's, your staff teams, your volunteer teams, and all of the patrons that are coming to your festival. It's important to think about what everybody's been through the last few years, and patience and understanding it is more necessary now than it's ever been. At this time, I would like to welcome Dionne Bishop from Events by Dionne Incorporated to introduce our panel and get into our next session. Dionne, over to you.
Good morning. Thanks so much, Dave. Happy to be here and also looking forward to today's session with the guest panelists. So I will do some early introductions, and first we have Rodola, and she is a Senior Account Manager, Strategy and Government Relations with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. So WSPS is the Designated Provincial Health and Safety Association for the services sector. Bringing a combined 20 years of experience in occupational health and safety and construction project management to her role, Rodola works with provincial and national trade associations to demonstrate a holistic approach to health and safety. Her portfolio and areas of expertise in the service industry with particular focus on hospitality, entertainment, and retail sectors. Her strong network within hospitality has also led to the creation of award-winning videos on ergonomics and knife safety. She sits on the board of directors for a long-term care and retirement residence in Toronto and holds a certificate in occupational health and safety and a construction project management certification. So welcome to Rodola. And up next also we have Alexandra. Alexandra is a health and safety representative with a focus on workplace mental health at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. She obtained her Bachelor of Applied Science in Occupational Health and Safety at Ryerson University and worked for a number of years in the health and safety field in various sectors, including utilities, tunneling, and residential construction. Following her time in the general health and safety space, Alexandra acquired her postgraduate certificate in workplace wellness and health promotion and has since also become trained in mental health first aid and workplace inclusivity. With a newfound focus and passion for mental health, Alexandra currently works alongside the consultants at WSPS to expand the Healthy Workplace portfolio and help workers both within Ontario and beyond protect the mental well-being of their employees every single day. So welcome to these ladies. Clearly they are the ones we want to hear from today. Around this conversation around mental health at festivals and events. As we move forward from, the pandemic, there's lots of conversation and opportunities for us to, train or get extra support as we reemerge. So to start us off, I know both of you have a bit of a presentation that you want to start with us. Looking forward to that. And then after that, we will open up for some questions and have some discussion. So over to both of you.
Thank you, Dionne. I'm hoping that my sound is okay for everybody. Thank you for taking the time to walk through this topic with us. As Alex shares our screen with you, I wanted to tell you that last week I had a last-minute opportunity to attend my first live music performance in about 3 years. And I'm in Toronto. There's a series on called The City of Culture right now. And I had the opportunity to see one of my favorite local artists. She's originally from Brazil, at a very cool venue out in the West End. So I had everything lined up. I had the babysitter lined up. I had time to get ready because it was last minute. I was going to jet off on my own. And as things go, it really didn't happen. So for those of you that are parents of kids that are 5 and under, or have parented through that time, you know what I mean when I say I was anticipating a night out alone, and also anticipating a night out with some very like-minded people in a room filled with some great music. Now, thankfully, however, the venue was able to broadcast the performance live over their YouTube channel. So arguably, some of the innovations that have come out of the last couple of years to keep us connected. And when we're talking about mental health and planning out this night, for me, I had all of you in mind. I had festivals and events in mind, and thinking about the stops and starts that this industry in particular has experienced. But now we are looking forward, and we are looking, as we reopen the province, to put together things that help us to regain that sense of culture, to regain that connectivity, to help to inform and entertain. And I often think about a throne speech that Minister MacLeod, the Minister of Heritage, Tourism, Culture and Sport, she gave a parliamentary speech last year, and she said, you know, this industry, festivals and events, live entertainment, this is the vanguard of reopening Ontario because of the things that they help us do in reconnecting with one another, our culture and our communities. So from our perspective at WSPS, one of the topics that we have been talking about for many, many years, and we have helped pioneer some of the studies and the programs in Canada, is workplace mental health. So we've been talking about this way long before the pandemic, and our frame of reference is going to always be, and to start with legislation, what the laws and the guidelines say about your working environment, and then best implementing these laws and guidelines to help everyone within your teams and within your staff. And I know that there are many things that go on in putting an event together. So from development to logistics, sometimes your infrastructure, all the way to your people, your staff, your volunteers, and your guests. So if we can move to the next slide, Alex. We do have to look at, from our perspective, what the law says, what the guidelines say, but Alex, being our mental health lead, she's going to help us look at mental health in the workplace and how to best empower our staff for some of the things that we anticipate will be happening. So next slide, please. As a bit of a review, over the years, we have compiled through a lot of hazard assessments, various risk assessments that work within the industry, a list of the highest risks within tourism, recreation, and hospitality. So from the lack of awareness all the way down to some physical hazards like dock safety, manual material handling, lifting, pulling, pushing, electrical hazards, we have falls from heights. We have this list, and certainly as we reopen, we consistently look at these things that continue to affect the industry. But what I would like to add onto this list is the working condition of fatigue. That's something that we have been trying to address for a very long time. Lots and lots of conversation and work and studies around fatigue, as many of you may know. So how all of this ties into mental health, and then you add on the extra layer of reopening post-pandemic, managing all of this is quite stressful. So to properly context our conversation today, and as one example that I know is a growing concern, we'd like to start with something that everybody has asked about over the last few months, and that is crowd management. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at crowd management, one, there is the anticipation of opening, and two, the anticipation of who our guests are. And in discussion prior to this prior to this presentation, we talked about, well, do we know who our guests are? As we kind of knew who they were before. So over the last 2 years, people have changed. Our guests have changed. Maybe attitudes and behaviors have changed. And certainly in the media, there is no shortage of news around the behaviors of crowds, both in the aggressive nature as well as some positive natures. So when we talk about some of the hazards that are presented by a crowd, we know that there is going to be the potential for, in large crowds, there's a crushing and a movement and getting pinned against structures and barriers. Sometimes there are surges. In particular, there's running. Sometimes objects can be thrown and climbing on equipment. There is a lot of dangerous behavior. So while there is still that degree of unknown when we open, as organizers and producers of events, we can best empower our staff to be able to handle what's coming in the next few months and years ahead by also focusing on mental health. I'm going to let Alex lead the discussion here. She is our WSPS mental health lead and will help to tie in the things that we know are hazardous and what we are anticipating to workplace mental health. So I'm going to let Alex take over.
Thanks, Rodola. So in order to start the conversation, I think what would be most helpful is to frame all of the components of health, because we're going to see as we continue looking that you can't really define mental health without defining health from a more holistic perspective. So according to the World Health Organization, health is defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. It's not merely just the absence of disease or infirmity. So a helpful way to look at this is sort of as this cube structure. So as I said, there's 3 elements. There's our social, there's our mental, and our physical. So when we think of our physical health, this is kind of probably what comes to mind most often. So physical health is the most visible, since it's the physical condition of our body, how well we take care of it. So, if someone visibly does not look well, you can probably assume that their health may not be optimal and vice versa. But there's also the other 2. So there's also our social health. So our social health is one's ability to form meaningful personal relationships with others and their ability to navigate social situations and behave accordingly in those social situations. And then finally, that's where we see mental health. So our mental health is a person's psychological and an emotional well-being. So this is the less tangible part of our health, because it's something that is going on, in the person's mind and is individual to every person. So another way that we can look at this beyond just the cube model is also thinking of a stool. So, by design, the stool is sturdy when it's got all 3 of the legs. It's balanced, it's supportive, it works. But, if one of the legs were to be removed or were to break for whatever reason, then the design of the stool is compromised. It's imbalanced, it doesn't work as well. So, not only that, but the other 2 legs are going to have to probably work a little bit harder to try to continue to work as a stool. So we can think of our health in the same way. So if we lose one element of our health, then the other 2 are going to be compromised. Whereas if we have all 3, that's where we see that holistic, healthy individual. So now that we understand health, we can also now further define mental health. So the World Health Organization also has a definition for mental health, which is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So as I mentioned briefly, everybody has mental health, and mental health is individual to every person. So the piece that we like to focus on here when we're looking at this definition is the statement, can cope with the normal stresses of life. So normal meaning what's normal to the individual. Normal for me as a, single person who only needs to care for themselves, probably my normal stresses are a bit different from someone like Radola, who had to consider, caring for her children before going out. But stress is relative to every individual, and where the mental health comes in, or the positive mental health comes in, is, despite your normal stresses, despite what you see on a day-to-day basis, you're still able to contribute to your community. You're still able to feel at the end of the day that you made a positive contribution, that you worked productively, that you were able to go home at the end of the day feeling like you truly contributed to that space that you were in. So that's where we see mental health. So, now that we have that understanding of health and mental health more specifically, we can start to shift to that workplace kind of conversation. And we can start looking at something that may affect our mental health. We may think that it's only a negative implication, but actually this element can affect our mental health in a positive and negative way, and that is the conversation of workplace stress. So, of course, stress is a part of our everyday life, both good and bad stress, as I mentioned. So, good stress can include times where we put ourselves in stressful situations for an endorphin rush. So something like skydiving, or accepting a job promotion at work, or going to a festival or an event or a concert. These are things that provide positive stress to our life. And, these types of stresses can actually feel good and are pleasurable to the body. But on the flip side, we can also experience bad stress. So, maybe that's something that's really overstimulating. Maybe we are constantly kind of bogged down at work and feel like no matter how hard we try, we can't complete all of our tasks in a working day. And that's where we see the stress that doesn't feel great on the body. And if it's persistent enough, it can actually be damaging to a person's mental health as well. So we can see stress as kind of like this model here, because, a certain level of stress is actually essential to live that productive life. Because if we have too little stress, then we feel that we're understimulated, we're not engaged in our work or our life, and, we just kind of feel dissatisfied. Whereas, too much stress on the other side, if we're constantly in a state of being overstimulating, then this can result in a decrease in performance, as well as potential health problems, as a result of being exposed to this constant high level of stress. So what's really important here is to find that perfect level of stress that will both motivate workers to work at their highest performance, or, in the life space, contribute optimally to our society, and in turn create that satisfying life, whether it's job satisfaction, job engagement, or just being involved in everyday tasks. So a workplace should be able to recognize the impact of stress placed on the individual, on the worker, and appropriately manage it so that workers are kind of sitting in that optimal level and feel successful at their job without negatively being impacted mentally or psychologically. So particularly stressful situations, often in the workplace or in life, are those that we don't have control over, of course. So in this space that we're in today, talking about running festivals or events, this could be instances or people that we don't have control over. Because you can do all that you can to create a great environment, create a fantastic day for those attending, but there may still be individuals who are not satisfied or who are frustrated for whatever reason, and this is something that we unfortunately can plan as much as we can plan for, but we can't at the end of the day control. And so this is where we're going to start looking at that conversation about hostile or stressful situations or hostile or stressful people, and what we can do to try to minimize the effects of that and minimize the situation. So the first thing that we're going to do then is try to understand, why these individuals may feel aggressive or may feel that they can't control their emotions enough that it does escalate to a hostile or assaultive kind of situation. So why might things escalate in the first place? There's this phrase that we've all heard, which is the customer first approach, or the customer is always right approach. And this sort of concept has led customers to believe that they are in a position of power, and they can act with authority or sometimes disrespect towards workers in an attempt to get what they want, because they feel that they're entitled to that thing. And so this, now coupled with individuals being pent up for so long, and for some, not necessarily agreeing with being pent up for so long in the first place. Maybe they never agreed with the restrictions, or they have some sort of issue with the restrictions. It's created this environment where workers, unfortunately, are more frequently subject to abuse. So, here's kind of a summary of why that might happen. So you see all these situations here: challenging topics, triggering behavior, feeling like they weren't ever heard, or that their opinion never mattered. And so keep in mind that all of these things, it's often not just one thing that individuals are upset over. There are often multiple things that are kind of piling up in the individual, which is something that we call trigger stacking, which can often be, also often be the last thing that you see that actually triggered them to become hostile. So this is often why we look at a situation and we think that an individual's frustration is very unwarranted or unreasonable. But often we don't see the whole side of it, and we don't see what kind of led to them being very upset in front of you in that state. So, now that we kind of have that ground work of why individuals might get hostile, how can we start to identify more specifically when things are escalating? And there's a 4-stage approach that we can look at. And we can try to look at signs for when we're in each of those states, to then do what we can within reason to try to mitigate the incident from continuing to evolve. So stage 1 is where we see the early warning signs. So, try not to ignore these very subtle but very important changes in an individual. So, if you start to see an individual that's looking a little agitated, maybe they're starting to fidget, they're starting to pace, they may be showing really dismissive or closed off body language, whether that's crossing their arms or using rude language to those around them, or being very short. That's where we're going to start to see those early warning signs. So if you can and you feel comfortable, don't wait for them to approach you. If you see someone that looks agitated, try to approach them with care and mindfulness and concern, and ask how they're doing, and if there's anything that you can do to help, because often in hostile situations, people may just not feel that they're being seen or that they're being heard. So if you validate their frustrations early on, in a calm manner, in a space of trying to kind of understand the situation and validate their reaction, sometimes that's all it takes. If you validate their reaction, I'm really sorry that you're not happy with X, or I'm really sorry that what this person said to you offended you in some way. Like, how can I help? Often setting the scene for them to validate their own reactions and proactively kind of diffuse the situation before it gets to further stages. Sometimes that's all it takes. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, but where we can diffuse it early, of course, that's kind of our main goal. So if that unfortunately doesn't work, this is where we're going to shift into stage 2, which is now we're kind of starting to escalate to a more hostile conversation. So of course, we hope to catch the agitation at early warning signs, but if they're missed or someone escalates very quickly and we can't even stop them from getting to this state, then that's where we need to kind of start to up our de-escalation strategies and make them a bit more of a priority. So what does this more hostile situation look like? We're seeing, raised voice. We're seeing perhaps their face is getting red. They're starting to breathe really rapidly. Maybe they're using even more offensive, rude language. They're starting to curse. You can tell that their tone of voice is constantly, raised or agitated. They're using, inappropriate name calling. Situations like that are usually a genuine tell that someone is probably becoming a bit more hostile than we'd like. So what do we do in this situation? Of course, we want to try to stay calm, keep our own emotions in check where we can, maintain a safe distance. So we're always trying to be mindful of what may be coming next or what's that next step. So we're trying to keep our distance from them to, of course, protect ourselves. If appropriate and if possible, we're also going to want to try to move that individual to a safe location away from others. So this protects others from them as well as them from others. And in this stage as well, if we can alert another coworker or a manager, we want to do that at this stage because, often there is power in numbers. And so if you don't feel comfortable diffusing the situation on your own, please feel free at this point to try to contact someone to just kind of give you that backup, that emotional support. And also try to allow for silence. Again, often sometimes individuals just need to vent and need to kind of get it off their chest. It's unfortunate that often individuals in a customer service sort of space are those who take the brunt of it. But, often if an individual just kind of needs to get it off their chest and then in that silence, in that moment of silence, they may, realize maybe I was acting in a bit of an inappropriate manner. Sometimes that's enough as well. And they may, kind of resolve the issue on their own. But again, unfortunately, that's not always the case. And we may see escalation to a stage 3, which is where we're starting to see that threatening behavior. So, when someone is starting to display those threatening behaviors, it's time to assume at this stage that it could progress to physical aggression at any moment. So this is where we now need to be exceptionally mindful of our safety and that of others that could also potentially be at risk. So at this point, we're going to want to summon help immediately. We're finding now that power in numbers concept is extremely important. And when the aggressor realizes that there's people on your side supporting you, they may remove themselves from the situation or stop further aggression. So this is where you really want to have that support system in place where they know that they can't, take advantage of you or intimidate you or create that space where you feel threatened. So again, this is where we're going to really want to be mindful of that distance. So we're going to want to stay at least 2 meters away from the individual, or 2 steps, or further enough away where if they were to try to strike you or push you or get in your face, you do have that sort of barrier or that buffer between you and that individual. We're going to want to, of course, not physically engage unless absolutely necessary, which is what we're going to cover in the next slide. And, we're always continuing to communicate. We're always trying to validate their concerns. We're always trying to feel or create a space where they feel that they are being heard. Because, if we've gotten all the way to this stage, there is still time to diffuse. We're always trying to diffuse. So just try to create that space, that calm space as much as possible, of course. If all of this fails and we are, seeing this assaultive state, or perhaps they've gone straight to stage 4 or stage 3, obviously emotions are not linear, but we're just trying to, pinpoint situations just so that we can try our best to mitigate or navigate the conversation. But we find ourselves in stage 4. This is where we're in that assaultive state. So if at this point you're unable to remove yourself from the situation, this is where you're going to need to defend yourself, of course. So if you feel that you do need to resort to this method, this of course is a last resort. So, it's not within the scope of this presentation to cover physical intervention techniques. I am not a self-defense expert, but, if your job has been identified as high risk, or you feel that you may be in this space at some point or another at a higher risk than those comparative to other environments, then additional training might be necessary. So this might be something that you do want to explore. Maybe you do want to explore self-defense or physical diffusing tactics. So just something to consider as well. But from, I can speak from a psychological perspective or from an emotional well-being sort of preventative perspective. So that's what I'm going to speak on here. So again, we're going to want to try to remain calm and composed. Pay close attention to the aggressor's sort of body language at this point as well for indications that they are going to become violent or are going to become assaultive. So obviously, we're not condoning physical aggression, so never put yourself or your own safety at risk and engage in that physical aggression unless it's absolutely a last resort for self-defense. So, of course, if you do feel threatened, try to give the aggressor what they want to protect yourself, because at the end of the day, there may be a policy or a program in place that is making the individual feel frustrated, but, it's not worth your own safety. So where you can just give the aggressor what they want, of course, that's kind of what we want to practice. But, if you do need to defend yourself in a physical space or a physical manner, only do this, of course, if it is a last resort. So, following any incident, the employer should also ensure that the physical and emotional well-being of the employee is taken care of and is considered. So what we're going to talk about in a couple slides as well is that aftercare or that debriefing, or what we can do from a psychological point of view to try to mitigate any sort of long-lasting or, acute effects of being in this traumatic space. So I've got some, high-level controls here. These are some examples of controls that can be implemented to help sort of minimize the risk of workplace violence. But of course, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. You need to consider your unique workplace, your exceptionally unique workplace, and the hazards that exist there. But these are kind of general kind of controls that you can put in place. But when you're considering, which of these controls might be effective, or maybe there's a more effective control that's not here, the best way to do that is to just put yourself in various situations and, try to consider what you would need to do to summon help, to leave the situation, or try to minimize or reduce the threat. So just some really high level kind of pointers on what not to do in these situations from a psychological perspective. So of course, we're going to try to remain professional as much as we can. So we don't want to trade insults or non-professional remarks. We don't want to talk down to the individual. We want to try to be as succinct and direct with our language without involving emotions as much as we can. So things like, yes, that is possible. No, I can't do that for you. Very direct responses that are straight to the point and are not dismissive in any way. Again, don't try to physically stop them or prevent them from leaving or ask them to leave if you think that it'll make them more aggressive. Again, we don't want to put our own safety at risk. So if they do start to, walk away from the situation, we're not going to want to continue antagonizing. Often sometimes in the heat of arguments or passion, we may kind of want to have that last word. But, of course, our safety comes first. So you may want to just allow them to physically leave if they want to leave. Obviously still keep tabs on them because they are probably still in a, heated state, and we want to protect others from them as well. But, if they're done with the conversation, then you're probably done with the conversation as well. And lastly, just don't block the view of the main entrance with, other staff or objects as like an intimidation factor, because again, then that's blocking the entrance or the egress from you as well. So you also want to utilize that means of escape, if you will, as well, if you need it. So now that we know how to, or are a bit more informed on how to recognize and prevent those potentially violent situations, what can we do after the fact from a proactive approach to both maintain our own mental health as well as protect the mental health of our workers from like an organizational approach? So first, we're going to look at the debriefing process on both an employee and an employer level. So what do we do in this situation? So we've experienced a hostile or aggressive situation. What are we to do after the fact? So from an employee perspective, we're going to want to notify the manager right away of this incident. We want to let them know what happened. At this point, we're also going to want to determine if police should be called. So if this individual seems particularly aggressive and they're not calming down anytime soon, if they're a threat to others or themselves, you may want to consider getting police involved as well, especially if there was an assaultive incident as well. Of course, then we're going to want to get the police involved. We're going to want to determine at this point if we need to notify the ministry or the WSIB. We know that in terms of when the ministry should be called, it's when someone is either unfortunately killed or critically injured, or if a person is injured and is unable to do their usual tasks or requires medical attention as a result of a workplace incident. That's when the ministry would need to be involved. And similarly, if an individual is injured, WSIB would need to be involved as well. And we're going to want to complete an incident report as well. So we're going to want to, much like any other sort of incident, we're going to want to capture the date, the time, the incident, what happened, and just have a record of that in case we need to investigate further. From an employer perspective as well, we're going to want to check in with the worker, be compassionate and understand that they were just involved in a potentially traumatic situation, ask them what they need and how they would like to be supported. Provide resources if they ask, and show care and concern for them. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. What can I do to help to ease the burden of having been put through that? And also, we're going to want to gather the facts. So not blaming. We're not looking for who's responsible. We're going to just want to get a sense of what exactly happened. So complete an investigation with those involved to determine how the situation could have been prevented. And again, remind everyone that, even if the situation did kind of go sideways very quickly, we respond to the best of our ability and we do what we can in those situations with the skills, the knowledge, and the training that we have at the time. And not every situation is going to be handled perfectly like we learn in the classrooms. And that's okay. You did the best that you could. You tried, and I see you, and I appreciate that. So I also want to quickly talk about the importance of self-care. So on an individual level, what can I do now that I've been in that situation to try to protect myself or to try to practice resiliency and mitigate the effects of being involved in a situation like that? And that is through self-care. So often we think, we don't have time for self-care. I have children at home. I have a job. I have to continue operating at this optimal level. I don't have enough money. It's a waste of time to take a bubble bath or do something like that. That may seem silly or frivolous, or I would love to go to the gym because it makes me feel good, but I just don't have the time. Or there's all these other impeding demands that take priority over my self-care. And that's where we see the statement, self-care isn't selfish. And we really undervalue, I think, the importance of self-care. And we don't, take advantage of things that we know could very easily de-stress ourselves. How can you support others, or be there for others, or work fruitfully, like we saw in that definition previously, if we're not taking care of ourselves? And so I just have some questions here to kind of get you thinking about the conversation of self-care, and what can you do to try to practice that mentally balanced life. So first of all, do you recognize when you're triggered? Can you pull out from a situation what your major triggers are? Maybe you're not the best at being put in those, hostile situations. Is that a very major trigger for you? If it is, can you do what you can to try to avoid that and be open and vulnerable with those around you and say, I'm not the greatest at dealing with that situation. Do you think that you can handle this? And so kind of get that concept in your mind as well. How do you de-stress yourself? What does that look like to you? What tools and resources do you have or can you use to ensure your own balance? So find what makes you feel good and take advantage of that. Set time aside at the end of the day to do whatever that thing is that makes you feel good, or start your day with that thing that makes you feel good as well. And lastly, do you have a support system? Do you have people that you can talk to, or avenues that you can explore if you're in a state, where you really need to talk to someone? There's been a lot of studies that have shown that in the workplace, having a workplace best friend or having a workplace friend is very, very important to be able to navigate these kind of social situations. And what we also see as well is some of the qualities that we see in the most successful leaders are those who practice, things like openness, emotional intelligence, empathy, compassion. So just kind of be mindful of that as well. So now that we understand what we can do at a personal level, what can be done as an organization to try to prevent psychological harm to others? And that's where we see this conversation about the workplace factors. So what exactly are these factors? So these factors are pulled from the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. So this is a voluntary standard which, when either adopted or adapted by workplaces, can help them to develop, implement, and monitor a psychological health and safety management system. So these 13 factors that you see here on the right are conditions in the workplace that can impact employees' psychological well-being while at the workplace, either positively when addressed or perhaps negatively when ignored. So when we are in a workplace that values things like psychological support, or values things like engagement, or my own growth and development, or cares about my opinions in matters, or notifies me when there's going to be a change that affects my work, we're more likely to feel supported, psychologically supported. We're more likely to feel heard. And as a result, we're more likely to want to succeed in the workplace, where we feel more connected to the vision and the objectives of our corporation, or just we are able to contribute to that because we do. It's one less thing that we have to worry about in the workplace. So these are, how can we then utilize these factors to actually implement a workplace mental health program? So how do I introduce these things, or how do I practice these things in the workplace to help us to implement a mental health program? So, on the surface, of course, implementing a mental health program may feel like an overwhelming responsibility. How do I do that? But, understand that any sort of incremental step that you can take, even as small as, talking about what you learned today, or, watching or wanting to increase your own sort of capacity for this topic, is absolutely a step in the right direction. So here are some really high level steps that you can take to sort of get started. So step one, understand, of course. So in order to implement these factors, it's important to first understand them and know what is meant by workload balance, or workload management, or balance, or clear expectations. So, take the time to educate yourself on each factor and what it means and its impact on your organization. And a really helpful resource that we have are the Ottawa Public Health Have That Talk videos. So there's 13 of them, and they each go through each of the factors, talk about, what can be done to implement each of them in the workplace. So step 2, we have assess. So we can conduct a needs assessment to see how these 13 workplace factors impact your specific organization. So there's a resource called the Guarding Minds at Work, which is a survey that gets put out, and it asks questions to individuals, which focuses on each of the 13 factors, and your results will highlight potential strengths or potential areas of improvement for each of those 13 factors, and will also provide resources to help you to address those factors as well. So it's a really great way to first get a feel for what it is that you should focus on, and also provides you with tools for how to actually respond to them. And step 3 is where we see that implementation or that response. So here, we can start to look at, how can we implement this within our organization? So first we have the readiness tool, which is a series of Likert scale, like 1 to 5 questions, scaled questions, where once you go through it, the website will then calculate, where on your journey you are, whether you're at the getting started phase, at the gaining momentum phase, or the raising the bar phase, and it'll give you some helpful tips at each of those stages to help you then implement your workplace mental health program. So it's really great because it's sizable, it's adaptable, it understands that not everybody is at the same part in their journey, and will provide helpful tips for you in that space. And finally, we have the WSPS Workplace Factors Toolkit. So this is a resource that I was involved in creating, which again, highlights each of the 13 factors and provides 3 to 5 resources for each of the factors in how you can action. So they are resources keeping in mind the workplaces who are looking to actually respond and action something. And so they're really great, tangible, vetted, researched tools, resources, pieces of literature that will help you to take those steps in the right direction. So I want to leave you with some more resources here. They vary in what they are. There's documents, there's playbooks, there's toolboxes, there's also training as well. So if you want to continue to pursue that de-escalation and that situational awareness conversation, we've got some training resources for you as well. I've also highlighted the Crisis Prevention Institute. So they are, as it suggests, an institute who are focused on de-escalation and crisis prevention. And we also have a final resource here called the Safe Management Group, which again focus on crisis intervention and de-escalation. So just a couple here for you. And if there's any specific that you want more information on, please feel free to ask. But I just wanted to leave you with some actions now that I've given you quite a bit of information. So that leaves us to the end of our presentation. So if there are any questions at this time, please feel free to ask. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that. It was great information. I was sitting here just kind of taking notes and trying to absorb all of it, and putting myself even in the position of attendee, putting myself in position of staff, and also as the organizer or the lead producer on site in how that impacts everything. So that was a really great breakdown. I guess just looking at time, we do have about 8 minutes left, and if there's any questions from anyone in the audience, feel free to drop it in the chat or in the Q&A button that's just at the bottom there. But I did have one quick question, and just see if we can kind of squeeze that in there, and it's for either of you really, I think. But we're just talking a little bit about again legislation and sort of what we need to do now as organizers in terms of creating safe spaces in the events for not only staff but volunteers and organizations. Just wondering any thoughts that you guys have in terms of what we may need to tangibly do, like if there's any tips of things that we can set up on site to help mitigate some of these issues in the case of, say, we always have EMS on site, we always have sort of first aid. Is there anything tangible that we can be doing that will impact the mental health portion?
Sure, yeah. Well, from the EMS sort of space, there is a similar offering that is similar to, when you take first aid training, and that's called mental health first aid. And so mental health first aid helps individuals to improve their overall knowledge of mental health. And also kind of, one of the difficulties with mental health, I think, is the stigma surrounding the topic. People are a bit scared to approach it because they don't really know, what that means, or, they're afraid to talk about it because now, what if I have to now, navigate that conversation, or what does that mean, now that it's kind of out there, or maybe I don't feel comfortable at all talking about it. So it also helps to decrease the stigma surrounding that, and kind of gets the conversation going and gives you helpful tips on how you can start to kind of break down those stigmas. And also, most importantly, perhaps, it also helps to have people feel confident with dealing with these situations, in the face of a mental health situation. So it equips you with the knowledge in the same way that, first aid equips you with the skills to, perform CPR or, remedy a wound. It does the same thing. So it allows you to, it gives you tips on how to navigate various mental health, whether it's a crisis or, just someone coming to you in a vulnerable state, letting you know that, this is what I'm dealing with. And, what are you going to do to help me now that you know this information? So I would say that that's a particularly sort of tangible offering that I urge individuals who feel that they may be in that environment where they may need to handle that. And, truly, I guess, empower individuals to feel comfortable and feel confident in being able to be that person, and that they can, take control of our own emotional state to be able to respond. Because, at the end of the day, we can't control others. We can only kind of control ourselves. So all that we can do is, build that confidence in individuals to be able to act, in a way that they feel responded to whatever it was that they were, whatever it was that they were given.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It sounds like, we have to update some crisis response manuals and things like that to include some extra considerations in this space. So this was really great. I appreciate all of this information. I think I'm just visualizing how it could look and sort of having not just only EMS, but, having someone there as well with mental health first aid. I know I would find that comforting, just being on site and knowing how to navigate those things. So I really appreciate that. That was great. I don't see any other questions that has popped up in any of the areas here. And so just being conscious of time, just looking over to you, Dave, if you want to perhaps wrap us up, or anything else from there.
Yeah, no, I think that you guys have done a great job this morning on really pinpointing a lot of, significant areas for all of us to think about as, not only as our staff and our volunteer base, but, the general public as well, because they're all part of the same program and going through the same thing. So, I think was a lot of great information there on how to analyze and how to recognize different signs and signals, and really appreciate Dionne, Rodola, and Alexandra, everything you've done for us this morning. Thank you very much. Well, we've got one more session left on Thursday, and we look forward to seeing everybody there. We're going to talk about, some events, how they transition throughout the pandemic. Darren Wingert, one of our Hall of Famers, is going to lead that panel. We're going to talk about our new event guide, digital event guide, and go through that process with everybody. So a lot of great stuff coming up. We're really looking forward to it. And at this time, I just want to wrap it up. And Festival and Events Ontario would like to thank the following sponsors for making Energize happy: the Province of Ontario, the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Cultural Industry, Destination Ontario, OLG, SmartServe, and of course our friends at Ticket Pro. Look forward to seeing everybody on Thursday. Have a great week, everybody.